Thank you. All right, then. Hello, everybody again, and welcome to our webinar, which is organized by ODI Global in partnership with the World Vegetable Center. And it's a pleasure to have you all here. My name is Shahzoda Alikanova. I'm a Senior Research Officer at ODI Global's Climate and Sustainability Program, and I will be moderating today's event. Before we officially begin with the webinar, I'd like to share a few logistical details with you. Firstly, the event will consist of 3 parts. The first session will present key insights from 5 studies conducted by ODI Global and the World Vegetable Center in the cities of Adama and Kisumu in Ethiopia and Kenya, respectively. The second session will be a panel of government officials and local stakeholders reflecting on how the presented research evidence can inform their work and speak to the challenges of delivering affordable, healthy diets in complex urban and peri-urban settings. And finally, the third session will connect the research to broader African and global policy processes, and we will open the floor to questions from the audience. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function, which you will find in the Zoom panel, and we will gather them for discussion during session 3. I also kindly ask all speakers to adhere to the time slots allocated for their presentations so that we can stay on schedule. I will be acting as the timekeeper, and I do apologize in advance if I need to intervene to keep us on track. So to help avoid this, please keep an eye on the time during your remarks. Lastly, we view this webinar as a platform for collaboration and knowledge exchange, and we therefore encourage all participants to introduce themselves by sharing their names and contact details in the chat box. So without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to hand over to my colleagues, Mariam Rezai, Food Systems Lead at ODI Global, and Nico Janssen, Agricultural Livelihoods Cluster Program Manager at the IKEA Foundation, for the introductory remarks. So, Mariam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shahzoda, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, and warm welcome. And thank you for being here with us. Needless to say that we are meeting at a time when the world feels increasingly uncertain, conflicts are growing, trust between countries is weakening, and climate shocks are no longer rare. They are happening all the time, and across many countries, development aid is also shrinking, even as needs are rising. So these global shifts have implication on our food systems, and in some contexts, they're hitting our food system pretty hard. Today, over 750 million people are going hungry. 1 in 3 people worldwide cannot afford healthy diet, and food prices remain high and unpredictable, and pushing many families, especially in poorer countries, to the edge. In parts of Africa and other developing regions, there's a mix of climate stress, conflict, and debt that is making it even harder for people to feed themselves and feed their families. And add to this complexity the rapid urban growth, and it becomes clear that the way we produce, move, and consume food really needs to change. And this crisis isn't abstract, it's real. And it's in every skipped meal, every empty plate, every parent that has to choose between food and school fee. And yet there is hope. Not everything is doom and gloom, and there is leaderships. We have been seeing that cities are stepping up, and they are not just places where food insecurity shows up most clearly, they are also becoming hotspot for innovation and action. Local governments are reforming food procurement, expanding school meals, investing in urban farmings, and reducing food waste. They are also regulating informal market and connecting to local farmers to consumers. And these are practical solutions. These are solutions that are rooted in daily lives and priorities of the communities. Unlike national governments, because when it comes to food system, we talk a lot about national governments, but it's good to keep in mind that cities are closer to the people, and that makes them quicker to act, and that makes them more flexible, more trusted. And also they're showing us that change is possible and is already happening. And that's why we are here. This webinar is about shining a light on those local realities, on the practitioners and partners who are driving real food system change. Together here today, we will hear how cities are rethinking how food is grown, shared, and accessed, and those lessons can inspire action, not only in the cities where we have that have been the target of our research, but in many other cities across Africa. So as you listen, I would like to invite you to reflect on a few questions. What's working and why? And what support do local governments need to go further? And really, how can we elevate their leadership on national, regional, and global stage? In a world where many systems are failing, we think that cities are showing us a different path, a path that is more inclusive and sustainable and resilient. So with this, I'm going to thank you for being part of this conversation, and let's use today's dialogue to support and scale the power of cities and hopefully to chart a path to a more food secure future that we all want. Thank you so much. Back to you, Shahzada.
Thank you very much, Mariam. I would like now to hand over to Nico.
Thanks, Sajoda and Mariam, for those clear words, and I think I can only applaud and welcome them, and I won't go deeper into indeed the challenges that we are facing today. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening, no matter what time zone everybody is joining from. As introduced, I'm Nico Janssen, working as a program manager at the IKEA Foundation. And at IKEA Foundation, we believe in creating a better world for the many people. And we try to do this in two key impact areas, planet and people. So how to reduce global warming and how to improve the livelihoods of people. And myself, I'm working in our agriculture livelihoods team, which is one of the 6 thematic teams that we have in the foundation. 6 years ago, we went on a journey to see how we can change agriculture production systems to be much more based on regenerative, circular, and inclusive principles, with a strong people focus, and of course, always for the many people. When we engaged with the World Vegetable Center to see how we can boost production and consumption of healthy green vegetables in East Africa, we discovered quickly that we would need to understand much better the demand and market dynamics to ensure that healthy greens would be available and accessible for all income groups, and especially also in the urban settings they're more and more living in. So we invited ODI to partner with the Veggies for People and Planet program that was run by World Veg to do an in-depth research and get a better understanding on the drivers of change from a markets and consumer side. And the results of this work, which Mariam just introduced as well, are presented today by the ODI team. So we are very grateful to ODI and World Veg that they were willing to take on this daunting task, and proud to see the results of this study. And we are confident that these contribute to finding answers that we need to make food systems work much better for people, planet, and nature at the same time. I wish you all a very fruitful and informative webinar, and back to you, Shahzada.
Thank you, Nico, and thank you both for your opening remarks. We will now move on to our first session. So Mariam from ODI Global and Julia de Bruin, scientist from the World Vegetable Center, will talk about the research highlights from the studies conducted both in Ethiopia and Kenya. So you have 13 minutes for this presentation. The floor is yours, Mariam and Julia.
Thank you very much, Shahzada. So my colleague Julia and I are going to share the findings from our action research project that we conducted in Ethiopia and Kenya that looks at how to improve sustainability of urban food systems that supports healthy vegetable-rich diet, especially for low-income urban residents. This was a fantastic partnership, as Nico just mentioned, between ODI and World Vegetable Center, and we would like to acknowledge the team across our organizations and our local partners who supported the delivery of this project. And of course, this wouldn't have been possible without the generous funding of the IKEA Foundation, so thank you. Our presentation in this limited time really doesn't do justice to the richness of the findings. We do encourage you to read the reports and policy briefs for details. Next slide, Julia, please. So as I mentioned in my opening statement, across Africa, food insecurity and malnutrition remain deeply concerning, and more than 3/4 of the population cannot afford a healthy diet. This crisis is especially acute in fast-growing urban areas, where food access is often fragile, and also diets are shifting away from nutritious and traditional food. Next. Thank you. So urbanization is transforming how food is produced, accessed, and consumed and disposed of. And I really want to emphasize on that last part, because that's very much aligned with our systemic thinking. African cities are expanding rapidly, bringing both risk but also opportunities for food system transformation. While we see many social and technological innovations in urban settings emerging, but still inequality, informality, and weak infrastructure can worsen food insecurity. Next slide, Julia. So to get a sense of this complexity of food systems and the trade-offs in delivering food security and nutrition for all, we do need to be mindful of the interlinkages within the systems and influencing factors that drive practices, investment, and behaviors. Next slide. It was with this concept in mind that we asked these questions, focusing on policy environment and enabling environment that is shaping access and demand for vegetable-rich diet in the cities. We looked at how we can improve efficiencies and sustainability of selected value chains. And we wanted to really get a sense of pathways to improve sustainability of food system across rural-urban continuum. Next. So guided by early consultation with some key stakeholders and literature reviews during the inception phase of this project, we designed 5 context-specific studies. And our goal was not just to describe problems and offer a wish list, but also to identify practical levers of change. Next slide. First, before diving into the city and study settings, I want to clarify that the selection of these cities were aligned with priority sites for the Vegetable for People and Planet projects. Let's start with Kisumu. Many of you might have traveled there or participating in this webinar from Kisumu. We have panelists who are leading the county government. But just for the context, Kisumu is Kenya's 3rd largest city with over 600,000 residents. And despite the vibrant local agriculture, 61% of the county population is food insecure. Urban diets lack diversity, and most children do not meet minimum diet standards. Also, interesting for us was that the large part of the agricultural production takes place in peri-urban areas. That made Kisumu a critical site for our work. Next. So one of the studies that we focused on was understanding the food loss in African leafy vegetables. And myself and Paul Opio, our local expert, conducted this study. So African leafy vegetables are affordable traditional crops that are culturally important and also very nutritionally rich. But from experience and from this study, we know that the scope of the food loss studies that have been conducted in Kenya have been mostly at national level and not at subnational level, and mainly focused on staple and cash crops. So little was known about the losses in African leafy vegetables, especially in urban and peri-urban areas. Our methodology followed a participatory approach, relying on mainly qualitative data, to look at food loss hotspots. So where is the biggest loss that is happening along the value chains of these crops? What are the root causes? And also to design solutions, not only to reduce food losses, but to prevent the loss from happening. Next. We mapped African leafy value chains from farm to market, and we realized that most farmers are smallholders and women play a central role, though often under-supported in both production and trade. Also, just to reiterate that we followed the definition of food loss and only considered crops that were ready to harvest for human consumption. And our investigation looked at losses from production to wholesale and retail market. We did not look at food waste at the supermarket, hospitality and catering services, and consumer waste. And that's one of the areas that we are proposing for additional future research. Next. So what did we found was that food loss happens at multiple points. But the most acute losses are happening on farm after harvest, which is 20%, and in wholesale and retail market, standing between 20 to 30%. Losses at transport is minimal, but that is only because no one is liable for these losses, and this poor handling during the transport is one of the main reasons that the high losses in market are observed. And also what we learned is that African leafy vegetable is called women crops. So all the women are the main actors, both as farmers and traders. Their limited access to land, finance, and decision-making power really contributes to many inefficiencies and sustainability of this value chain. So empowering women is directly linked to food loss reduction through land rights, training, leadership, and can really improve system resilience. And you have many of these quotes from the ground from these women actors. You find them in the report. Next. So food loss isn't due to one issue, because we often think that access to finance or technologies is one of the causes, is the main cause of the food loss. So it isn't. It's a combination of weak infrastructure, knowledge gaps, climate impacts, behavior, and policy failures. And tackling this really requires a whole system, multi-actor approach across capacity building, strengthening collective action and market linkages. Can we move to the next slide, please? So yeah, as I was saying, we are looking at a kind of a systemic failure that has to be addressed through a holistic approach. And the solutions, I'm not going to go into the detail of this solution. The solution really span across capacity building, collective action, cooperatives, and strengthen market linkages, access to finance for a small producer and traders, but also most importantly, behavioral and mindset change, and improving regulatory framework, including addressing the informalities. Next, we explored whether urban consumers value improvement in food safety and sustainability. Would they pay for convenience, for washed, well-packaged vegetable, or do they consider organic products? Next slide. So we tested this in 5 markets in Kisumu. This study was led by World Vegetable Center. Consumers were willing to pay 26 to 29% more for vegetables sold in hygienic condition or labeled as agroecologically grown. And this is an important signal for vendors, for regulators, and planners. And interestingly, consumers didn't value convenience such as pre-plucked leaves as much as they valued safety and quality. Of course, education and income shaped preferences, but across the board, hygiene mattered the most. Next slide. So the evidence from our research in Kisumu shaped the foundation of a policy roadmap and recommendations to strengthen food system in urban and peri-urban contexts in Kisumu. They also point to the need for a coordinated cross-sectoral strategies. We know that Kisumu County has a food loss and waste strategy, a food system strategy, and we are really hoping that the findings could be considered in some of the actions that the county is considering. And reducing food loss and promoting vegetable-rich diet is not just a technical challenge, and it is about governance, investment, and inclusion. Next slide, please. So moving to Adama in Ethiopia, a fast-growing city known for its urban planning, but despite these advances, diet-related health risks are also rising. 40% of those visiting clinics and they had central obesity, and vegetable intake remains low due to price, access, and weak supply. Next. One of the studies that we considered was to analyze, to understand food system policies in Ethiopia and whether they encourage or hinder the access and affordability of healthy diet in cities. We analyzed how national food system policies are decided, developed, and implemented, and also what role city governments play. We wanted to understand key actors, power dynamics, and influencing who are influencing policy design and local engagement, and how that is considered. Also, we wanted to kind of identify barriers and gaps that are undermining policy coherence and implementation effectiveness. Next slide. We used a political economy lens to unpack who makes decision, how power is distributed, and what limits effective implementation. And that also included screening 26 diverse policies across food systems. Next. So these policies really ranged from Ethiopia food system transformation policies, food security, trade, climate change, and based on a scoring system, we identified 6 case study policies for deeper analysis and for applying the Kaleidoscope model. Next. What we found out was that decentralization exists in theory, but mandates are unclear. Coordination is not strong, and non-state actors, especially civil society and private sector, have limited involvement, and also local ownership, which is a key for implementation of these policies, is lacking. And also we found out that this is not only about bringing the local governments around the table, is also to empower them and build capacities and financing them to meaningfully contribute to this agenda setting and development of the policies. Next. And specifically on vegetable sector, we found out that vegetables are available, but the supply chain is quite fragmented and underdeveloped. Prices are volatile and quality is uneven. There is a strong interest in home gardening and local trade, but policies don't fully support this. There are some examples of successful policies from the local government, but they are not systematically applied. Next. And finally, we developed a theory of change that linked food governance with supply chains and urban consumption, and this aimed to move from policy intent to practical impact, especially for policies to work for low-income household and vulnerable groups. I'm going to end my part of presentation here and pass the floor to Julia to take you through the studies on food environment in Adama. Julia, over to you.
Thanks, Mariam. So I'm Julia from the World Vegetable Centre. I'll present on 2 further studies and then offer a few closing remarks. So the first is a study that I led in Adama in Ethiopia, together with my collaborator Paulos and my colleague Tinso. And this study was focused on trying to understand what shapes consumer behaviour in these kind of urban contexts around vegetable access and consumption. So for this research, we used a food environment framework, which, as the name suggests, is a way of thinking about the many settings in which people are acquiring and consuming foods, making decisions about foods. In this study, we were primarily focused on retail food environments, but also thinking about all the other ways that households in an urban context can access food. Perhaps having access to some agricultural land, home gardens, schools, workplaces, social settings, and other contexts. So when we study the food environment, we use this as a way to think about the different levels of factors that influence food access and food choice. In this simplified framework on the right here, we see these distinguished as external factors and personal factors. So when it comes to vegetables, we would think about things like which vegetables are available in a given context, how much they cost, the properties of those vegetables, things like quality, safety, processing, packaging, vendor properties, characteristics of retail outlets, opening hours, payment methods, as well as marketing and regulatory factors. But we also recognize that people within the same context can have very different experiences. So on the personal side, we also think about things like accessibility, where someone might live relative to where vegetables are available, whether they have access to transport, affordability relative to their own circumstances, convenience factors, as well as a whole range of different issues related to desirability, people's own preferences, their household preferences, their knowledge, skills, cultural context, and so on. So within this study, our aim was to think about the food environment of Adama City and to explore the characteristics of that environment, consumer experiences of the food environment, and how this influences vegetable access and choice, with the aim of guiding some intervention options. So we used a mixed methods approach to this research. We started with some quantitative research where we conducted a mapping and census activity of vegetable retail outlets. For this part of the research, we worked in 4 sites within the context of Adama City. So we looked across an urban transect from the inner core of the city to the outer areas, and we chose 2 inner kebeles, 1 middle and 1 outer in the city. And in each of those locations, we started from the Kebele office as a central point, and we created a sampling site of a 1 kilometre radius around that central location. And so for this survey data collection, we recorded the location and some information about each vegetable outlet that we found within that radius. Our second phase was a qualitative research phase where we worked in just 2 kebeles, 1 inner and 1 outer. And in that case, we were working with people from different socioeconomic levels. So we convened focus groups with people from lower income households, middle income and higher income. And we used a range of participatory activities within those groups. From the image here, you can see some pictures of different vegetables, which people have sorted into different piles according to how frequently they would be consumed, and use this as a focus for some discussion. We also had a range of voting and ranking exercises to guide our discussion. In terms of our analysis, we used our mapping exercise to create a vendor typology to understand the breadth of places where vegetables are available. We looked at the spatial distribution of outlets across the city and the availability of different vegetables across that urban context. We looked at descriptive summaries of our survey data and exploring the significance of some of those differences between location. For our qualitative research, we used a thematic analysis approach based generally around a food environment framework. And so our third phase was to take those research findings back to a stakeholder workshop at the end of last year. So looking at food system stakeholders at a city level within Adama, reflecting on findings and coming up with some recommendations. So what we see in terms of the food environment is quite a diverse picture. We have a large number of vegetable outlets in markets, central market stalls, as well as these community market or neighbourhood market stalls scattered through the city, often in high traffic areas where we have a cluster of vendors selling from some rudimentary market stall type structures. We have retail outlets, small retail shops, stocking a range of different household items and often a small number of vegetables or fruits. We have Sunday markets, which came up in Mariam's slides, which are a government initiative to try and increase vegetable access and access to fresh produce in areas of the city where central market access might be difficult. We also have a range of these mobile vendors, people selling from carts, from baskets, from mats, who move around opportunistically to try and find customers. We also see a very small number of more formalized retail outlets, just a couple of supermarkets and some mini markets identified through our sample. So here we have a map of Adama City with our 4 sampled locations across that urban landscape. And we can see the distribution of outlets around those sample sites. In total, we located 840 vegetable outlets within this sampled part of the city. 80% of those were concentrated in the inner strata of the city, these 2 inner sites here. And that was primarily because of that density of vendors coming from central markets. In outer areas of the city, it became more significant, these small retail shops and mobile vendors. These maps are probably quite small on your screen, but I wanted to give an indication about the distribution of different vegetables that we see across the urban context. We see that we had 493 vegetable outlets selling tomatoes. And we can see that they're very widely spread out across those sampled areas of the city. We had 172 cabbage vendors, and while the number is significantly less than tomato, we still see a wide geographic distribution. Ethiopian kale vendors, much fewer again, but we still in that outer part of the city see a moderate number of outlets that are providing access to Ethiopian kale. In contrast, when we look at green beans, not only is the number much lower at just 15 outlets through this census, we find that they're only located in those central markets. So for someone living in the outer parts of Adama City wanting to buy green beans, the requirement would be that you would need to travel into that central market in order to make a purchase. Here we have a kind of rough distribution about vegetable consumption frequency coming from our focus group discussions, where people were assigning vegetables to different categories based on their consumption, from daily consumption through to very rare or never consumed items. And we identify that across all income levels and all strata of the city, we have 5 vegetables that appeared in all groups as a daily consumption vegetable. So that's tomato, onion, chili and berbere pepper, and garlic. And we can appreciate that several of those are actually more what we would consider condiments rather than vegetables. We have a moderate number of vegetables that fall into the kind of weekly consumption, maybe every few weeks, things like potato, carrot, kale, lettuce, beetroot. And then we have some much less commonly consumed vegetables. So overall, we don't see a huge diversity in the types of vegetables people are consuming on a regular basis. These are just a few select insights from our focus group discussions. We identify affordability and prices as a key driver of vegetable choice and vegetable consumption across all income groups. For those in the lower income groups, like this quote kind of highlights, not having enough money would deter people from purchasing vegetables at all, let alone more expensive vegetables that they might aspire to consume. But we also saw cost coming up as a consideration in the higher income groups. Significantly, we saw a lot of discussion about the cost of transport in the outer area of the city across all income levels, and people talking about how this factored into their decision making about traveling to the central markets to buy vegetables. We had a lot of discussion about habit, familiarity, and cultural norms. There was a strong sense of certain vegetables being very core vegetables, central to people's diets. People spoke about them as being essential, critically needed foods. These foods were kind of spoken about as, being part of the diet from childhood. And there seemed in many cases to be a reluctance to incorporate unfamiliar items into the diet and a strong tendency to favor habitual and traditional recipes. We did see evidence that exposure, promotion, and training could offer opportunities to diversify the diet. People speaking of chances to have traveled within or beyond Ethiopia and being exposed to new items, learning how to prepare them, and then incorporating it into your diet at home. There was also a lot of talk about things like YouTube and social media as ways where you might see some motivational message or some recipes that might inspire you to try something different. We also saw some discussion around home gardens and a widespread interest, as Mariam also mentioned, in gardening, but also people recognizing barriers around land access, water access, housing tenure, and so on. But for some people, there was a sense that producing your own vegetables would give you a greater assurance about safety. just briefly touch on a second study that we also conducted in Adama, which was focused on hygiene, transaction costs, and pricing. For this study, we were responding to the kind of dual considerations around safety, quality, and affordability that we know exist in an informal sector of markets, and knowledge gaps around what shapes vegetable pricing amongst vendors. So in this study, we wanted to understand hygiene practices and transaction costs across different retail outlets to try and understand what shifts prices between vendors and within an urban context. So for this part of the study, we just looked at 2 outlet types, market stalls and small retail shops. We focused on just 2 vegetables, tomatoes and Ethiopian kale, and we worked in 2 of those locations where we did the vendor census, an inner and an outer part of the city. So we collected data through structured surveys on things like product quality, hygiene practices, procurement costs, and vendor characteristics. We created a number of hygiene indices, and we constructed some hedonic pricing models to look at what influences price. We found that for most vendors, they were acquiring produce from wholesalers, with just a very small percentage acquiring stock from farmers. We found some contrast between retail and market stalls in terms of hygiene and freshness and quality. So retail shops tended to have better hygiene facilities, but higher spoilage and lower quality produce, whereas market stalls had limited infrastructure, but they tended to have better quality produce. And that seemed to be attributed to a higher turnover of stock within a market stall, shorter supply chains, higher frequency of stock being replaced, but it did come at the cost of transaction costs and the time to procure new stock. Just shifting along for time, just kind of highlighting some of the factors that we found to be significantly associated with tomato prices in particular. We found higher prices in shops compared to markets. And within market stalls, we found significantly higher prices were associated with higher quality produce, as we might expect, additional labour requirements, and better equipment hygiene, with a suggestive association that higher transport costs would also impact prices. And across both types of outlets, market stalls and shops, we found that older vendors were more likely to sell at higher prices. So to close with a few recommendations, from our policy work that Mariam presented, we highlight the need for greater coordination across sectors, greater cohesion in terms of food system policies, the need to empower actors, non-state and local actors, and strengthen their capacity, improve monitoring, evaluation and accountability mechanisms, look at ways to promote local governance and decision-making, and find ways to ensure that financing models are linked to demonstrable progress. When it comes to the food environment research, we identify the need to really think about how we can improve affordability for those kind of most vulnerable households, whether it's through targeted subsidies or voucher programs, social welfare schemes that include a focus on vegetables. We think about the importance of community markets, and particularly those Sunday markets, which are a government initiative to try and improve affordability and access, thinking about how we can scale that model and improve its effectiveness. We also need to think about how we can improve opportunities for urban food production. There's a high level of interest from what we can ascertain, but there's potential to look at some innovative approaches, rooftop farming, hydroponics, potentially community gardens in an urban context, as well as thinking about some of those urban planning considerations, particularly about transport linkages from outer areas of the city through to central markets. And finally, thinking about that vendor pricing study, we identify the need to improve efficiency within markets, things like purchasing, bulk purchasing, coordinated transport, cooperative systems, trying to invest in market infrastructure, particularly around cold storage for perishable products like vegetables, and think about how we can drive behaviour change on the consumer side through large-scale behaviour change campaigns. So when we look across these 5 studies that we've led, we've highlighted the multiple points at which food loss is occurring when it comes to leafy vegetables, and the need to think about those targeted gender-sensitive actions to achieve change. We highlight that urban consumers do place an emphasis on hygienic stall environments. We identify a willingness to pay more for safe, quality produce. In urban contexts, we see that vegetable consumption is driven by many factors, including affordability, access, and culture. Pricing remains an area for further research. We identify some interesting informal market dynamics that affect both pricing, hygiene, and access. And finally, we emphasize the need to decentralize food governance to improve access to healthy diets in urban areas. In terms of our research outputs, the ODI website includes a page where a lot of these outputs can be accessed. We have an overall report that presents findings from these 5 studies. We have a couple of policy briefs and a couple of reports on the food loss and food systems policy studies. And in terms of academic outputs, we have a number of manuscripts that we hope will be coming out later this year. I'd like to thank the IKEA Foundation for supporting this work through the Veggies for Planet and People program. And thanks everyone for listening to our research findings.
Thank you very much, Mariam and Julia, for a very insightful and informative presentation. I'm sure that our participants are eager to ask you questions. So this is a reminder to keep posting your questions in the Q&A box so that we do not miss them. We will address them at the end of the 3rd session. Now, I'd like to move on to the panel to get insight from the perspective of government and local stakeholders. And I would like to ask each panelist to take 5 to 7 minutes to reflect on 3 questions. Firstly, how are city and national governments in Kenya and Ethiopia currently addressing the challenges of urban malnutrition and access to healthy diet? Secondly, what are the key barriers to implementing food system transformation that prioritize urban nutrition, and how can national and local actors better coordinate to overcome these obstacles? And finally, how can partnerships between governments, research institutions, and development agencies be strengthened to foster more inclusive and sustainable urban food systems? So now I'd like to introduce the speakers of our 2nd session. Ashagri Giptan, he is a lead researcher at the Policy Study Institute in Ethiopia. Eric Omondi Ogalo, Chief Officer of the County Government of Kisumu, and Ms. Rebecca Wanjiru, Food System Specialist at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Kenya. So let's start with Ashagri. Ashagri, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Shandoza. Yeah. Maybe I will start with overview of Ethiopian food system. Just transforming Ethiopian food system is about promoting food security, safety, nutrition, and healthy diets. So when the government is thinking that transforming this Ethiopian food system will help to fulfill our constitutional duty of offering access to food, focusing on priority and enables to take actions. And this is really very, very important. And the government has its own food system governance model. And this model has 3 pillars at federal, regional, and partnership, in which different actors are involved. It includes, these actors include the farmers, input suppliers, agriculture, processors, distributors, rentals, innovations, and others. So these are the governance system in Ethiopian food system. Although we have this, as you said, we have some barriers in Ethiopian food system to transform, especially the urban nutrition. And to mention some of these are really the urban population or urbanization is increasing and diets are shifting. So this one is one of the challenge, and the other is the weak urban food supply chain system, which is also indicated in your study. And there is also policy focus on limited policy focus in urban nutrition, which is also assessed in your study. There are also other barriers like economic barrier, fragmented government and coordination gaps, and climate and external shocks. So how we can better coordinate this to overcome these barriers? The first one is to strengthen this urban specific food and nutrition policies, which can be implemented at national level or at local levels in cities, like, for instance, in Adama cities. There should be some kind of strategy that support urban farming system and improving the market system as well, which is also indicated in your study. In addition to this, to overcome these barriers, there should be improvement in our urban food supply at national and local levels. And this may include like transporting using cold storage systems. As you mentioned, there may be some spoilage from production site to market site. So there should be investment in cold storage, wholesale market, and in delivery to reduce food wastage and cost. In addition to this, there should be some support, shorter supply chains, like linking pre-urban farming directly to the city markets via e-commerce platforms. And in addition, there should be enhancements in multi-stakeholder coordination to establish urban food councils, like involving different stakeholders within the city. And there should be actually data-driven decision-making. And this will really improve urban nutrition surveillance using mobile service to track food prices and delivery trends. In addition, actually, there should be promotion of affordable and nutrition food access, like subsidy or vouchers who are low income in households to buy fruits, vegetables, and pulses. Urban agriculture incentives, as you mentioned, there should be some farming system to increase production in urban cities, like rooftop gardening, hydroponics, pre-urban dairy cooperatives to boost local production. And there is also strengthening crisis like resilience, which expand urban cash crop for nutrition programs. Well, actually, this study really very important, like ODI, and this is because vegetables, they play, most of you know the importance of these vegetables. They really play crucial role in healthy food systems, providing essential nutrients, dietary fibers, contributing to well-being and food security. So studies like this really very, very important for nutrition contribution, food security and poverty alleviation, healthy benefits, and versatility of food systems. So as a conclusion to my insights, Ethiopian urban food system transformation requires better policy integration, which are mentioned in the study as well. There should be some investment in infrastructures and public partnership. National actors must provide regular frameworks, while city government and need localized solutions like food hubs and nutrition education and others. By aligning these efforts across sectors, Ethiopia can ensure urban population have access to affordable, safe, and nutritious food. And studies like ODA BID is really very much appreciated and can be used to improve our policies and strategies in urban agriculture. Maybe this is what I have. If there are more questions, maybe I will be back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashagri, for your insightful response. I would like now to pass on to Eric to reflect on the same questions.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here on this platform. I just wanted to start by mentioning that the county government of Kisumu is one of the local governments that were the very first in the front line in the development of the food system strategies. That is the food system strategy 2023 to 27. And these were the efforts that were aligned with the implementation of the county integrated development plan 2023-2027. And the aim of this was all to amalgamate efforts of all stakeholders in contributing towards a sustainable food system. And the strategy's aim was to ensure that all the locals, the county members of Kisumu counties, they have all the time an access to safe, healthy food and water in sufficient quantity and quality to satisfy their nutritional needs for optimal health. A lot has been said on this platform, which touches on some of the things that we do as a county. I want to mention specifically what we did. I transited into water as a chief officer water, but initially I was in agriculture. Well, last year, 2023, 2024, in terms of increasing access and availability, we managed to procure conical gardens, especially in promotion of the African leafy vegetables within the urban agriculture context, so that we ensure that the urban food, we create awareness around the production of African leafy vegetables through the conical gardens within the Kisumu County. This is coming against the backdrop that Kisumu County, most of our vegetables are comes from the peri-urban. The peri-urban includes even the neighboring counties like Vihiga and Nandi counties, which supply us with a lot of vegetables. So as a county government, our efforts are geared towards ensuring that the local productions in terms of availability and access of safe vegetables are the citizens within Kisumu County emboldens the activities around increasing food production, especially on the vegetable context. The question that was asked, what are some of the challenges that we are experiencing with this one, is basically on the resourcing. Most of the times, resourcing is very limited to ensure that we ensure that all the population within Kisumu are adopting into these practices, and also ensuring that we are growing vegetables within Kisumu. And I want to thank partners. We've steered ourselves into engaging with many partners. Like currently, I want to mention I've seen most of the FAO representatives here. There's a program that is coming up on Green Climate Fund, which again is just focusing on African leafy vegetable. And this is going to be a partnership between County Government of Kisumu and FAO to ensure that we develop that value chain on the African leafy vegetable. So, and we also add a partnership between us and the GIZ, geared on targeting the youths to adopt practices around the growing of vegetables within Kisumu. And we have seen a lot of progress in terms of expansion, in terms of people picking up the technologies around vegetable growing, which actually addresses the issues of access and availability within Kisumu County. The food system now touches many things, as you all know, that it's a whole value chain, processing, the markets, and I want to mention something on the markets, something that we are doing together with the national government. We are geared in terms of improving our markets so that the vendors, the vegetable vendors, we reduce a lot of food loss, especially on the vegetable vendor side. There are currently about 2 markets that are being constructed within Kisumu County. And we are looking forward into even going into procuring cold storage so that we can go ahead in terms of reducing the post-harvest losses in this aspect. The second question that was asked: what are the biggest barriers to implementing food system transformation? I've touched on the issues around climate change is big. Those are the biophysical barriers. The climate change, resource is also an issue. Resources is an issue, and also the shift in population. You see, population of Kisumu is growing progressively, and this one creates a lot of demand for food. And so, as much as we are looking at interventions, each and every time we still have a lot of gap that we need to address as a government to ensure that the citizens of Kisumu have access to safe and to safe foods. There are also issues around policy. Despite the fact that we had placed in place a food nutrition policy, there are still policy gaps that we need to address as a county government. And we are working hand in hand with so many partners to ensure that these policy gaps and food governance are addressed so that we address the issues around the food nutrition within the county. Finally, I think the last question that was asked was on how do we ensure that these partnerships between governments, research institutions, and development agencies are strengthened. I have mentioned some of the partners that we are working with. One of the key things that has led to some of our success, and I think which we need to continue doing, is on aligning our strategies and ensuring that all the communications are clear right from the start when we are doing something, and all our goals are clear, so that everybody is aligned when we are doing any project. Many partners, you find that when we are working, even the development, the research agency, people sometimes try not to be open from the beginning when they are doing projects. So we are looking forward for aligning our strategies with the partners, making clear communications when we have projects that are starting up, so that we get the ownership, total ownership, right from the government agencies and also the development partners and the research partners. I want to stop there, and I'm much appreciated to be in this platform. Working with the ODI and World Vegetable Center was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eric. It was a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for your useful insights. I'd like to now hand over to Rebecca.
Thank you so much. I'd like first to start with appreciating the research that has been shared. And apologies if you hear some background noise. I'm in a shared workspace, but I would like to appreciate the research, especially on the food loss for African leafy vegetables, because it actually feeds into work that we have been doing on supporting the government develop a food loss and waste strategy, and how this can be contextualized to the counties. So it will really inform our work in terms of interventions with the counties and the cities. So in responding to how cities and national governments are responding to urban malnutrition challenges, first of all, in Kenya at national level, we have a National Food and Nutrition Security Policy, and this is the overarching policy that informs interventions on food and nutrition insecurity, both in urban and rural areas. Beyond that, the national government has really placed an emphasis on diversifying diets as a pathway to addressing malnutrition in the country. So following the Food System Summit in 2021, Kenya identified diverse diets as one of the pathways that will actually lead to transformation of the food system in the country and address malnutrition. So both across the rural, urban environments. So when we look at now moving to so already the national government provides that overarching policy environment. When we look at the cities and how cities are responding to urban malnutrition, for example, with practices on urban agriculture in Kisumu and Nairobi, I can say that Nairobi has an Urban Agriculture Act, which provides the framework for implementation of urban agriculture. And we realize that this is so critical because as cities are urbanizing and given the multi-sector nature of governance within the urban areas, having a policy framework really plays a critical role in promoting urban food production, because most of the time what we see within the cities is that you have communities and farmers who are trying to engage in urban agriculture, but we have one arm of, let's say, government or the authorities that do not understand why this is being done and contribute to the communities not engaging in urban agriculture. So having this urban agriculture framework is really critical. And then, as has been mentioned, that we have 2 cities in Kenya that have food system strategies, which were developed in a very multi-sector approach to ensure that there are initiatives and actions that drive investment to food system transformation and particularly address urban malnutrition. So with these 2 strategies, one interesting thing is that the 2 cities, the Kisumu and Nairobi, are already anchoring these strategies within the CIDPs. And in Kenya, the CIDPs, the County Integrated Development Plans, are the ones that drive investment and budgets into addressing actions or funding into initiatives such as urban agriculture and production of food in urban areas. So that's one element where cities and national governments are reacting to urban malnutrition. We also have nutrition investments. The country is focusing on expansion of food markets. Mr. Eric has mentioned about 2 in Kisumu. Nairobi is looking at around 20. So there exist opportunities whereby different partners can come in to support and ensure that these food markets are able to address nutrition challenges by ensuring there's access to food, reduction of food losses within markets, investment of cold storage facilities. Currently at FAO, we have an ongoing project in Kisumu and with the national government that is looking at how, and working with financial institutions and looking at how do we drive investment into wholesale markets and SMEs by inclusion of nutrition sensitive criteria into financing mechanism for wholesale food markets. So these are some of the initiatives that are being used, or how national and city authorities are responding to urban malnutrition. In addition, I think there's a lot of work that is going on, and FAO has been involved in this in terms of promoting urban agriculture, looking at innovations. We had the Green Cities Initiative, looking at innovations that can promote urban food production in small spaces. And you realize that in Kisumu and in Nairobi partly, that mostly what is produced within the urban spaces is vegetables, and especially African leafy vegetables. So what we do is look at what kind of innovations can we use, the vertical gardens, the sack gardens, and we've been playing a critical role in terms of providing technical capacity, training farmers, urban farmers, on how to produce within urban spaces in collaboration with the local governments. So when we we asked the question on what are the barriers to transformation within the urban spaces. And when we think about urban malnutrition, one barrier specifically related to urban food production is weak zoning regulations within the urban and peri-urban spaces. Weak zoning regulations are contributing to competition for land within the urban and peri-urban spaces. One of the cities that we are focusing on in this webinar is Kisumu, and I think Kisumu is urbanizing at a very fast rate. And we noticed that a lot of land is being fragmented within the peri-urban spaces and converted into real estate. So that is one big barrier that would require concerted efforts with urban planners, with the government, with the city management to ensure that we protect these production spaces. Most of our national policies have had a rural bias to food and nutrition security. And this goes back to the fact that evidence still indicates that food insecurity and poverty is higher in rural areas as compared to urban areas. However, when you disaggregate urban populations and now look at the different socio-economic groups, you realize that food insecurity and poverty is very high, especially within the low-income populations. So there has been a lot of bias on policies on rural food insecurity and a lot of interventions focused on that. So what we are doing at FAO is also trying to bridge this gap and working with the national government to ensure that urban food insecurity is also mainstreamed within the national conversation and strategies on addressing food insecurity. A lot of siloed approaches, both at national level, county level, and within even development partners is another barrier to implementation of food system transformation in urban areas. So we find that even as partners, we operate in siloed approaches sometimes, and we have interventions that don't speak to each other. Government's interventions do not speak to each other in terms of the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Environment, planning. So we really need to bridge this gap in terms of addressing these approaches. When we looking at the last question whereby you've asked how can partnership between different players create more inclusive urban food systems, I think one thing that has been mentioned is in regards to evidence and data. Data on urban areas and urban food insecurity is rarely available. And for example, when you look at Kenya, the data that we get from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and the economic and household budget surveys does not always disaggregate according to urban areas, or all the indicators related to food security are not always disaggregated. So we have limited access to data, for example, on malnutrition, food poverty within urban areas. So I think it's important for partners to work together, leverage on each other so that we could be able to provide evidence that could inform policy. Capacity building is another area that we can leverage on each other's efforts to ensure that we are able to mainstream the aspect of food system transformation within the urban areas across the different sector. And finally, I think evidence-based policies is another area whereby partners can also contribute and work together to ensure the development of these policies is informed by research. So I'd like to stop there due to time, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for your very informative responses. I'm now happy to move on to our last session, which is on bridging gap between wide African and global policy. So in this session, we will hear from Luc Metelekamp, Senior Professional Officer from ICLEI Africa. And after this session, we will begin Q&A session. Over to you, Luc.
Thanks, Miriam, and good morning to everybody. And it's been wonderful listening through and just really getting a feel for the depth of the work that you've all been doing. Just gonna see if I can bring my screen up. Is it showing on your side?
Yeah, we can see.
Great, cool, thanks. Yeah, I'm trying to, in a sense, draw some of the connections between the detailed casework that's been done and some of our broader work as ICLEI, as well as a range of other partners we're working with, building a kind of continental alliance around urban food work, as well as linking into some of the broader global conversations. So I think the kind of, for me, the backing context to this really is that, and I think as Rebecca has been highlighting, food is increasingly and kind of malnutrition and food insecurity is increasingly being recognized as an urban and peri-urban issue. This was some of the kind of data coming out of FAO, which was presented in the recent HLPE report, which I think really highlights that while there is certainly very serious kind of rural hunger and malnutrition issues, that when you look at the total number of people, food and nutritional insecurity is really an urban issue, and this is truer nowhere more than in Africa at the moment. So I think this urban transition and what this is meaning for how we respond, I think is really front and center to a lot of the work that we're doing. But I think it reflects in some of the kind of ongoing narratives, policy narratives, when one looks, for example, at the African Union and what's coming out of the post-Malabo, the kind of follow on to that and the Kampala declarations, is just that in many ways, the urban is still missing from the African Union agenda. Rural hunger and rural employment kind of largely dominate there. And I think that still exists across many of the, I suppose, climate and other policy landscapes that we look in and we work in, is that when you talk food, this is still, in spite of the urban nexus of this, very much still focused on on rural challenges. So I think that's I think for us some of the backing work and where a lot of our efforts and advocacy work are coming into this space. I think this is not new news to anybody on this call, but I think it's important to preface this. I think the other point, which is for us very important to recognize, is that in light of Africa's rapid urban transition, we've got a very narrow window of opportunity to get it right for African cities. We've got a narrow window of opportunity to lay the infrastructural foundations, but also a narrow window of opportunity for the policy foundations for Africa's cities. It's the towns and cities today that we all know are rapidly growing into kind of small to medium-sized cities. And what we lay down now over the next 10 years is going to set the, I suppose, trajectory and foundation for how those urban food systems operate for the coming 50 to 100 years. I don't think this point is, in a sense, new to anybody on this call, but I really do feel that it's something that we need to just be talking about it every moment. And I think this point of around, how we coordinate urban food. I don't think there's a city, and we work across about 20 cities in Africa, that has a department of food in the same way that it has a department of agriculture or health or, water and transport. So why does that matter so much? I'm from South Africa, so looking at the South African national budget allocations, and how and where food expenditure takes place. South Africa is spending roughly 9% of its national budget on food-related expenditure. So we did some mapping that looked, that connected budgetary allocations to the right to food in South Africa. And I think there were a few interesting points that came out of it. First was just how big that budget allocation is, second only to our educational budget. However, that budget has never been recognized essentially as being so big because it's so fragmented and spread across so many different departments. So we broke this down into essentially 4 categories. The first is around supporting own production. So that was, food, agricultural production investments, which came out, this is in South African rands, but you get a sense of the proportions at about 5% of expenditure. And then there was the provision of direct food aid. So that was looking at the provision of, school meal programs, meals to prisons, early childhood development, and creches, and kind of social relief food packages. And that came out also on a similar level to agriculture, around 5%. But I think what was really interesting around this was that, the vast majority of the national budget was going actually through direct cash transfers. It was helping people to be able to afford food. And that was mostly through the pension grants, child grants, and other social disability grants in South Africa, but also through support to students. And then critically, and I think this is often under-recognized, and I think links to some of the policy conversations around, the promotion of fresh vegetables and leafy greens, is around the kind of potential use of VAT exemptions, value-added tax exemptions on certain food crops and certain food categories. And those three collectively, formed the vast majority of where South Africa's food expenditure was taking place. So, however, in spite of there being, so much work taking place across so many departments, there was essentially no strong coordinating function either in South Africa or when one looks, and I think Kenya might be a little bit ahead of us in this sense, but there was no strong coordinating function that was responsible for managing the impact across this 9% of South Africa's budget. I think the same, when one looks at Kenya, this was the Kenyan budget in 2022. There's a lot of conversation around agriculture and school meals, but actually it's kind of cash transfers to elderly, orphans, and kind of hunger safety net programs that are accounting for the large majority of expenditure that's going towards supporting and ensuring that people have safe and sufficient food. So I think this trajectory, and I think this is really relevant in the context of our urban transition and the kind of global and kind of African policy debate, is that there's a shift away from production into social security and safety net programs and school nutrition programs as the kind of the main pillar through which governments are ensuring that they're meeting their obligations towards the right to food. With this, however, it means that the way that we're investing in food systems is becoming a lot more complex, and hence the need for much better coordination. We cannot afford to be leaving it solely in the hands of agriculture, although agriculture obviously remains critical. And again, forgive me if this is something which is quite familiar to many of you, but I think that there's a real lesson to be learned, particularly across Africa, given our parallels to much of what, economically and to a lot of Latin America, is Brazil's experience. And I think Brazil has really been leading the way in setting up clear structures from national government right the way down through subnational to local governments around how government departments coordinate, how and who takes responsibility for which aspects, as well as bringing in a kind of clear focus and space for the way that citizens and civil society gets involved in policy formation and implementation at all levels of government. And I think what's interesting to reflect on when one looks at Brazil's experience on this is that it has not been led by kind of departments of agriculture, but most of this work, particularly when it comes down to local government level, sits with social development. So it's really seen as a social development output rather than a kind of a food production question. So I think there's a lot to be learned from this. And yeah, in some ways, I think this is starting to take place. I think there is a growing recognition across the continent and a move towards clearer kind of governance of the food system. And I think, Rebecca and Eric's examples from Kisumu really speak to this. There's more and more cities and local governments that are experimenting with different ways of improving how they're governing their food systems. So we're working with Ricolto and other partners in Mbale that have, built out Good Food Parliament, which is essentially a kind of multi-actor, multi-stakeholder coalition that's doing quite amazing things in Mbale around the coordination of kind of a diversified portfolio of food system activities there. And I think what was interesting, and also to kind of pick up on some of the earlier findings of this research and the research that you did around the importance of food safety and food hygiene, is that was essentially studies on food safety in markets were the catalytic issue that pushed food onto the kind of governance and political agenda in Mbale, around which this parliament was formed. Kisumu, I won't repeat this because I think Eric has done a very good job at this, but I think really leading the charge in much of this, and I think many others looking to see, how things are working in Kisumu and what can be learned from there. I think there's other cities like Lusaka where there's a growing portfolio of donor investment, but also kind of local investment into the multiple facets of the food system there, and the kind of city recognizing that they are needing a kind of dedicated portfolio, or at least 1 or 2 people to be helping to coordinate across departments on that. The city of Cape Town has also done similar things and has had a quite well-established food program that they've developed and has been running for at least 5 years now. In Chef Shawan, the city working with, what many of us would think of as unexpected partners, but around with UNESCO and recognizing the kind of cultural preferences and the value of kind of Mediterranean diets as a kind of heritage for the city. And I think they're using that as a kind of rallying call for kind of driving a kind of food governance movement in Morocco. So I'm just highlighting these because I think it speaks to a kind of examples and trends of the way that different cities are trying different things across the continent. And I think, to me, what I hope, with the likes of this coalition on this call and others, we can build and drive up into a more of a concerted continental movement in this space. I think some of the stuff is happening already, through work we're doing in our AfriFoodlinks project, which is kind of building city-to-city exchanges across Africa and exchanges between practitioners. But we're not alone. There's many others that are doing this. I know GAIN is doing work on this. The Milan Urban Food Policy Pact has been doing amazing work at leading some of this work, and there are many others. So I think this thing of how we help cities learn from one each other, and how we build up the kind of governance mechanisms at a local level to include civil society too, are really, really important. And I think there's a lot that's being done on that.
Sorry, Luke, apologize. As I mentioned before, I have to intervene. Would you be able to wrap up your points within the next minute or two? Because we want to have time for questions. Thank you.
That's fine. I can wrap up on this point. So yeah, I think from our side, just recognizing that essentially local governments are taking on an increased role, and that as they do this, they are seeing that the kind of national governments as the key advocacy target for that they're needing additional support from. So we did a polling across a number of the partners and cities that we're working with, and the big call was that it wasn't so much a global advocacy need that was targeted, but that there was a big need for targeting messaging to national governments, and that's really what cities were needing, both in terms of budget allocation, but also in terms of increasing kind of policy room and kind of devolution of mandate. So yeah, I can wrap up there.
Thank you very much, Luke, for bridging our research and the other discussion on to wider African and global policy. I'd now like to open the floor to questions. I will start with the questions that were addressed to specific speakers. So the first question is for Julia. How do you view the replicability of these results in other mega and secondary cities in Ethiopia? Also, what scalable local practices have you observed among traders that could help reduce food loss, if any, particularly for leafy vegetables? Julia, could you please keep your responses very brief, within a minute or so? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the question. I think it's interesting just hearing from the other panel members today. It's been insights offered from other urban contexts. So I think we have some insights from this kind of in-depth research that can be applicable to other contexts, but of course every urban context and every rural context is quite different. So I think there is a need for these kind of studies where we can, deep dive and understand specific contexts and their specific challenges, I think that's an important part of the way forward for urban food systems transformation. But I think some of the issues around sort of supply chains, competition for land, issues with affordability and transport, market infrastructure, there's a lot of common issues that we see across many urban contexts. So I think some variation and some common threads that we can build upon. To the issue of food loss, we didn't examine that within the Ethiopian context, actually. We looked at market infrastructure and some of the challenges there around sort of limited access to cold storage and so on. But I don't know if Mariam can perhaps speak to some of the innovations identified around food loss reduction from the Kisumu study.
Actually, we have a question. If you finish, Julia, I can read out the next question, which was basically addressed to Mariam. So Mariam, what is your recommendation on the overall potential of urban agriculture in the context of rapid urbanization and changing land use dynamics? And also if you could reflect on the part of the question on food loss.
Yeah, as Julia said, and thanks a lot for these really great questions. As Julia said, we didn't really look at the food loss in the Ethiopian context, but I think both Eric and Rebecca, they gave a lot of insight on many innovations that are ongoing and has been done in Kisumu. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go deep into that. Please look at we have a specific report on food loss analysis in Kisumu, and we are highlighting some of those innovations. On the urban agriculture, what I want to reiterate is that urban agriculture sometimes is considered as a silver bullet, but really it's not. Is a part of the solution. It's very important for improving access to fresh vegetables, especially in the communities that, as Julia was saying, are further away from the vegetable selling points, and also land access is a major constraint in informal settings. So based on this, I think it's important to keep in mind that integrating these solutions on urban agriculture into city planning, as Rebecca was mentioning, is really a core component, and also the issues including zoning and how they consider urban agriculture, and also I think the last one would be the support that we could provide to small scale producers with and home gardening with inputs, training, and access to market. In the interest of time and to give the floor to other panelists also, I stop here, but happy to follow up on any of these questions if you would like to discuss.
Thank you, Mariam. So I think I'll probably take one last question that was addressed specifically to Eric. So the question is, how can the citizens strengthen food systems to help vegetable vendors reduce post-harvest losses and maintain quality, especially in informal markets? Could you kindly elaborate on the food policies the government are trying to implement? Eric, would you like to reflect on this?
Thank you so much. One of the things that we are looking forward to do as a county government, and I mentioned, is restructuring our markets. A lot of investments that are going to go into the infrastructure around the market stalls and the vendors, so that we can have an organized market system. If you look at Kisumu, especially in the evening, most of our vegetables are sold around. You find the vendors are outpouring within the streets, along the streets. And this one leads to a lot of food losses. So as a county government, what we are going to do, based on the two infrastructural development that are happening around markets, is to look at how can we organize our traders once they receive the products from the farmers, so that they have an organized market system to reduce on the post-harvest losses, especially the marketplace. The other thing is the diverse supply chain. How can we shorten that? And part of the address to the shortening of the supply chain is to foster on the urban food system. I mentioned to you a lot of products are lost on transportation. If you look at a lot of wastage comes even within the transportation from the farm to markets. So as a county government, we've started cultivating, pushing on the agenda of the urban farming. How can we zone spaces, those empty spaces that are within the cities, to create awareness within the communities, to start community gardenings, grow vegetables within those spaces, so that we avoid dependency on the vegetables that come within the nearby counties. Those are some of the strategies we are looking forward. There's also the concept of looking at the aggregations. How can we aggregate so that we in terms of aggregation, again, we address the issues around the pricing, affordability. Once you aggregate, you are able to know which market you are taking it to, and reduce on the pricing, make it affordable when we aggregate them. And I want to mention one group. There is this group in Nyamasaria, a place called Nyamasaria. It's a peri-urban within the city, where we target on the widows. Actually, it's a widow group. Widows have come together as a group, and they are really developing the value chain around the African leafy vegetable. And they're doing a lot within the Kisumu context. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. And I thank all the panelists and presenters for answering the questions. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for Q&A. We have received a couple of more questions, and I encourage all the participants to address those questions to the panelists in private messages or emails, which everyone should have shared. So I would like now to pass on to Mariam to give us some closing remarks for the session and for the whole webinar. Over to you, Mariam.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it has been such a rich webinar that is very difficult, and we are 3 minutes above the allocated time. So first and foremost, I want to thank you all for your insight. Also thanking the participants who have stayed with us throughout these presentations and the panel interventions. There has been a lot of rich discussion and insight throughout the session. I think what we have heard today is, from our research and from the panelists, is clear that urban food system matters, that cities are increasingly important spaces of innovation, leadership, and opportunities for food system transformation. We also heard from Kisumu and also from Ethiopia that many initiatives are happening, and that change is possible. So when local governments are empowered and vendors and farmers, especially women, are supported, and when consumers are heard, then urban food system can become more just and more nutritious and more resilient. I want to close with 3 messages. So advocating for centering cities in national food system policies, not as an afterthought, but as a drivers of transformation. I think we heard a lot about that, and also address some of the challenges of data availability, disaggregated data, which could help with targeted policies and intervention. And also investing in practical people-first solutions, especially the ones that address both supply and demand and prioritize equity and sustainability. And also lastly, like we have heard the local voices, and we need to elevate these local voices through various initiatives at global, regional level, and from the market trader to municipal planners, because they hold the insight and agency to really lead this change. And we hope today's conversation is really a step forward in recognizing and supporting the power of African cities and their agency to build food systems that nourish, as Nico mentioned, both people and planet. Thank you very much, and let's keep the momentum going.
Thank you very much, Mariam. And I again thank all the participants and speakers and presenters. And we hope to see you in our next events. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.